You can't be serious. Dad's voice was sharp, the deep lines on his forehead tightening as he paced across the living room of the lakeside cabin. Outside, the sun was setting over the water, the golden light reflecting off the glassy surface, an almost cruel contrast to the storm brewing inside. My name is Ethan Miller, and I'm 32. I built my career from nothing, working my way up in stock trading with long nights, hard decisions, and a lot of sacrifices. Over the past 5 years, I've silently covered the property taxes on this so-called family retreat, paid off my younger brother's car loan, and even chipped in for my parents' medical bills, all while never asking for anything in return. But that ended today. Dad glared at me, his jaw clenched. Your brother needs that money for his new business, Ethan. You're just hoarding your wealth while we struggle. I let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. Struggle? Dad, I've been paying for everything. The taxes, the repairs, the insurance, Mom's out-of-pocket medical costs. And now, after all of that, you're calling me selfish? Mom sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on them like they were the most interesting thing in the world. She wouldn't even look at me. Dad scoffed, waving me off. We raised you. We gave you everything, and now you're turning your back on us while your brother is trying to make something of himself. And then I saw it. An envelope, half hidden under a magazine on the coffee table. The bold letters on the document peeked out just enough. Trust Fund, Nathan Miller. I felt my heart drop. I reached for it before Dad could stop me. Ethan, that's private, he snapped, but it was too late. My eyes scanned the document, hands trembling as the truth unfolded in front of me. A $400,000 trust fund, carefully set up for Nathan, my younger brother. Only for Nathan. The same father who had told me for years that money was too tight to help with my college tuition. The same family that had watched me work 2 jobs just to scrape by. The same parents who had let me struggle while they built a financial safety net for my brother behind my back. When were you going to tell me about this? My voice came out quieter than I expected, but there was no mistaking the anger beneath it. Dad had the nerve to sigh like I was the one being unreasonable. Ethan, investment decisions aren't that simple, right? You just conveniently decided my future wasn't worth investing in, while Nathan gets a golden parachute. Mom finally spoke, her voice soft, careful. Sweetheart, Nathan needs more help than you do. You've always been so independent, so capable. We're proud of what you've built, but she didn't finish. She didn't have to. I already knew the ending of that sentence. Nathan needed help. I never did. I was being punished for my success, while my brother was rewarded for his dependence. You know what? I exhaled slowly, setting the trust fund document back on the table. I'm done. I'm done paying for the lake house. I'm done covering for Nathan. I'm done financing this entire family's life while I get nothing in return. Dad frowned. The taxes are due next month. Then maybe Nathan can use his trust fund to pay for them, I said, grabbing my jacket. Mom gasped. Ethan, don't be dramatic. Dramatic. That was what they called it when I finally stood up for myself. I walked out the door, leaving behind decades of expectations, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to free, but I knew this was just the beginning. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. My mind raced, replaying the conversation over and over. My father's outrage, my mother's quiet complicity, the way they had looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. I'd been blind, or maybe I just didn't want to see it. For years, I convinced myself that the sacrifices I made for my family were just part of being a good son, that I was repaying them for everything they'd done for me. But now, standing in my own living room, the reality hit me like a freight train. I wasn't giving back. I was being used. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Dad, you're really going to abandon us over money? A second later, another text popped up. Nathan, you're acting like a child. You have plenty of money. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Not a big deal that I had paid nearly $120,000 in family expenses over the past 5 years. Not a big deal that my parents had been lying to me about their finances while secretly building a cushioned future for my brother. Not a big deal to them because it was never their money they were spending. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat at my desk, pulled out my laptop, and opened a folder I had been keeping for years but never thought I'd actually need. Financial contributions family. Every transaction, every payment, every receipt. A brutal, undeniable record of how much I had given. Lake House property taxes, $48,750. Nathan's car loan payments, $19,620. Mom's medical bills, $7,300. Family vacations I paid for, $26,200. Miscellaneous emergencies, $15,000. Total, $116,870. I stared at the number until my vision blurred. How had I let it get this bad? I took a deep breath and reached for my phone. If my family wanted to treat me like a bank, then it was time for them to see the final statement. I attached the spreadsheet and sent it to both of them. A minute later, my phone rang. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came almost immediately after, then the third, then Nathan. I turned my phone off, let them sit with it. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from my mom, 6 from my dad, and God knows how many texts from Nathan. I scrolled through them, already knowing what I would find. Dad, this is an unfair attack on your own family. Nathan, you really think this means anything? You make more than that in a year. Mom, honey, can we please just talk? Nathan's message made my blood boil. I tapped out a response. Me, then you shouldn't have a problem paying for your own life from now on. He didn't reply, but my mom did. Mom, sweetheart, I understand you're upset, but this isn't just about numbers. It's about family. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm. Family. The word they always used when they needed something from me. I ignored the text. Instead, I got dressed, grabbed my laptop, and headed to a meeting I had scheduled late last night, one that was long overdue. You've been incredibly generous, Ethan, Joseph said, sliding his reading glasses down his nose as he looked over my spreadsheet. But this isn't sustainable. Joseph Klein had been my financial advisor for years, the guy who had helped me build my investment portfolio once I started making real money. He was also one of the few people I trusted. I know, I admitted. I just didn't realize how deep I was in until now. He sighed, tapping his pen against the desk. And you've never asked for repayment? They're my family, I said simply. Joseph gave me a look. You mean they're your dependents? I swallowed hard. Not anymore, he nodded. Then let's make it official. No more family expenses, no more quiet payments. And if they owe you, we put it in writing. It was a drastic move, but I knew he was right. For 2 hours, we went through everything. I revoked the automatic payments on Nathan's car loan. I removed myself as an authorized payer for the lake house. I transferred all future contributions into a private investment account labeled My Future. Then we drafted an official financial statement of what my family owed me. I didn't plan on making them pay it back, but I wanted them to see it in black and white. That night, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Mom, I said, my voice steady. Ethan, she breathed, like she had been crying. Please, your father is beside himself. Nathan is furious. You don't understand what you're doing to this family. I closed my eyes. Mom, I'm just stopping what never should have started. There was a long silence. Then, softly, she said, You're going to let us lose the lake house? I laughed, actually laughed, because there it was the real concern. Not about how they had treated me. Not about how unfair it had all been. Just about what they were going to lose now that I wasn't footing the bill. Sell it, I said flatly. Ethan. Or ask Nathan to pitch in. He has $400,000, right? She was quiet again. Then, barely a whisper, it's not the same. Right, I said bitterly. Because he actually gets to keep his money. The conversation ended soon after. I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally playing on even ground. And I wasn't backing down. I expected silence. I thought maybe after sending them the hard numbers, after cutting them off financially, my family would finally understand. That they'd back off, let things settle, maybe even take some responsibility for their choices. I was wrong. 3 days after my last conversation with my mother, I came home from work to find Nathan waiting outside my apartment building, arms crossed, leaning against the wall like he had all the time in the world. My stomach tightened. I hadn't seen him in person since the confrontation at the lake house. Really? I sighed, unlocking the front door. You're just gonna show up like this? He pushed off the wall and followed me inside. You wouldn't answer my texts because I didn't have anything to say. Well, I do. I let out a slow breath, turning to face him in the lobby, then make it quick. Nathan narrowed his eyes. You're seriously letting Mom and Dad drown? They raised us, Ethan. They sacrificed for us. And now, just because you're throwing a tantrum, you're cutting them off completely. A tantrum. I clenched my jaw. I'm not cutting them off. I'm just done paying their bills while they sit on your trust fund. Nathan scoffed. That's different. How? He faltered. Because that money isn't for bills. It's for my future. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. And I guess mine didn't matter? Come on, Nathan groaned, rubbing a hand down his face. You make way more than me. You don't even need their money. That did it. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. I didn't need their money, Nathan. The first needed their support, the same way they supported you. Instead, they let me struggle while they built you a safety net behind my back. He looked away, jaw tightening. It's not my fault. You're right, I said, voice clipped. But you sure as hell benefited from it. He exhaled sharply, hands on his hips. All right, fine. You want me to contribute? I'll help with the taxes this year. I raised an eyebrow. With what? The money they gave you? His mouth snapped shut. Yeah, that's what I thought. I shook my head. Nathan, I'm not arguing about this anymore. I don't owe them or you anything. He stared at me for a long moment, then scoffed. You know what? I don't even know who you are anymore. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That makes two of us. I walked past him, heading toward the elevator. Nathan didn't follow. The fallout was immediate. The next morning, I had 10 missed calls from Dad. I ignored them. By lunchtime, my email inbox had an urgent message from Mom with the subject line, "Please reconsider." By the time I got home, there was a letter taped to my front door. I ripped it off, unfolded the paper, and skimmed it. Dad wasn't asking anymore. He was demanding. Pay the lake house taxes immediately. Reinstate the automatic payments for Nathan's car. Apologize for causing division in the family. The last line made my stomach turn. If you refuse to act like family, don't expect to be treated like one. I let out a slow breath. There it was. The threat. They weren't just mad. They were cutting me off. By the weekend, word had spread to the extended family. Aunt Lisa texted me, asking why Dad was so upset. Uncle Mike called, saying he was confused about what was going on. Then, the worst one. Grandma. A voicemail, soft and shaky. Ethan, honey, I heard there's trouble. You've always been such a good boy. Whatever this is, just fix it, okay? Family is family. I closed my eyes. I loved my grandma. She was one of the few people in my life who never made me feel like I wasn't enough. But she didn't know the full story, and I wasn't about to drag her into this mess. Instead, I sent one group message to the family members who had reached out. If you want to know the truth, ask Dad why he created a $400,000 trust fund for Nathan while letting me bankroll the family for years. Then I turned my phone off. Let them sit with it. Days passed. Silence. Then, finally, cracks. Aunt Lisa called. Twice. I didn't answer. Uncle Mike sent a text. Holy crap. I had no idea. Dad never mentioned a trust fund. Then, one night, my cousin Maddie FaceTimed me out of nowhere. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. She didn't waste time. Ethan, are you seriously telling me you've been paying for the lake house this whole time? Yep. And Nathan has had a trust fund the whole time? Yep. Her jaw dropped. No wonder Dad is pissed. I frowned. What do you mean? Maddie leaned in, lowering her voice. Dad called a family meeting this weekend. He wants everyone to side with him to make you feel guilty enough to cave. I let out a slow breath. And you're telling me this because I think it's bullshit. She folded her arms. And I'm not the only one. I stared at her. You mean Uncle Mike, Aunt Lisa, and even Grandma know something isn't right? Dad's been lying to everyone for years. A slow, unfamiliar feeling crept over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing alone in this. Maddie exhaled. Look, if you show up to this meeting, I think you should bring receipts. Dad's been running his mouth, but I guarantee he didn't tell everyone the real numbers. My grip tightened on my phone. I had the numbers. I had the proof. And for the first time since this all started, I had something else. Backup. The family meeting was set for Saturday at 3 p.m. By Friday night, my phone was still buzzing with calls and texts, mostly from Dad and Nathan. I ignored them. Instead, I spent my evening at my desk, organizing my receipts. I wasn't walking into that house empty-handed. I had every bank statement, transfer receipt, and text message documenting the money I had poured into the family over the years. I printed copies, highlighted the major expenses, and stapled them into neat little packets. Dad wanted a public fight? Fine. But I wasn't showing up to lose. I pulled into my parents' driveway at 2:55 p.m. There were already 6 cars parked out front. Uncles, aunts, cousins. As I walked up to the house, my heart pounded in my chest. This was it. I stepped inside. The entire family was gathered in the living room. Dad stood near the fireplace, looking as self-righteous as ever. Mom sat on the couch, wringing her hands. Nathan leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, a smug look on his face. The room fell silent as I entered. Dad cleared his throat. "Glad you could make it." I didn't bother responding. Instead, I walked straight to the coffee table, set down my stack of financial statements, and took a seat. "All right," I said, leaning back. "Let's talk." Dad didn't waste time. "You've caused a lot of stress for this family, Ethan," he started, pacing like he was giving some big speech. "You're refusing to contribute, you're making accusations, and worst of all, you're turning people against us." I snorted. "You mean I told them the truth?" His eyes flashed. "You're being dramatic. The family has always relied on each other." "Yeah," I tilted my head. "Then tell me, Dad, who else has contributed as much as I have?" Silence. I leaned forward, tapping the stack of receipts, because I ran the numbers. And in the last 5 years, I've paid $116,870 toward this family, while Nathan has paid, let's see, $0. Aunt Lisa's eyebrows shot up. Uncle Mike let out a low whistle. Even Mom looked down, embarrassed. Dad's jaw tightened. "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point." I grabbed one of the packets and passed it to Grandma. "Here," I said. "Take a look. It's all there. Every payment, every transfer, everything I've covered while Dad told me there wasn't enough to help with college, or rent, or anything else." Grandma took the papers with shaky hands, adjusting her glasses as she read. The room was dead silent. Then she whispered, "Oh my God." Dad's face went pale. "Mom, you don't understand. You mean to tell me," Grandma interrupted, voice sharp, "that Ethan has been paying for everything while you've been sitting on a trust fund for Nathan?" Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. No excuse, no justification, because there wasn't one. Nathan finally spoke. "Okay, yeah, maybe Ethan paid for a lot," he said, crossing his arms. "But so what? He's rich. It's not like it hurt him." I let out a slow breath. "You really don't get it, do you?" Nathan shrugged. "You're just mad because you didn't get a trust fund." I laughed, but it wasn't out of amusement. "No, Nathan, I'm mad because I thought we were equal. I thought when Mom and Dad told me there wasn't enough money to help me, it was the truth." He rolled his eyes. "You always had more than me." I narrowed my eyes. "Because I earned it." "Well, maybe if you weren't so obsessed with money," I repeated, voice sharp. "That's funny coming from the guy living off a $400,000 safety net, while I spent years making sure Mom and Dad didn't lose the lake house." Nathan flinched. "Speaking of," I added, turning to Dad, "how are you handling those taxes this year?" His face darkened. "Ethan, because I'm not paying them," Mom gasped. Dad clenched his fists. "You're going to let this house go into foreclosure?" I shrugged. "You have options. You could sell it. You could use Nathan's trust fund. Or, you could start paying for your own lifestyle." The words hung in the air. For the first time in my life, Dad had no control. The family meeting ended in chaos. Aunt Lisa was furious. "Greg, you told us Ethan was being selfish, but you never mentioned he was bankrolling the entire family." Uncle Mike shook his head. "And you had the nerve to ask me for a loan?" Grandma was the angriest. "This is shameful," she muttered, glaring at my father. "Absolutely shameful." Nathan looked humiliated. Mom looked like she was about to cry. Dad? He just stood there, seething. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. As I stepped outside, Maddie caught up with me. She looked at me for a long moment, then smirked. "Damn, that was brutal." I shook my head. "It was necessary." She nodded, then nudged my shoulder. Grandma's already talking about changing her will." I blinked. "What?" Maddie grinned. "She's pissed at Dad, and she really doesn't like being lied to." I didn't know whether to laugh or be horrified. Instead, I just exhaled. "I don't even care about the money, Maddie. I just wanted them to see the truth." She smiled. "Well, they definitely saw it." I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one fixing their problems. And it felt damn good. By Monday morning, the family group chat had exploded. I hadn't checked it since the meeting, but curiosity got the better of me. Aunt Lisa, Greg, you owe Ethan a real explanation. This is disgusting. Uncle Mike, you told me Ethan was being selfish, but you've been using him like a damn ATM. Grandma, I don't want to hear a single word from you, Greg, until you figure out how to be a decent father. I smirked. Dad hadn't responded once. But then I saw the most interesting message of all. Nathan, this is getting blown way out of proportion. The trust fund isn't even that big. Maddie's reply was instant. Maddie, it's $400,000, genius. And Ethan still had to pay for your car. If it's not that big, maybe you should give half to him? Nathan left the group chat. I laughed out loud. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? A deep sigh on the other end. Then, it's Mom. I closed my eyes. I wasn't in the mood for another guilt trip. What do you want? She hesitated. Your father isn't taking this well. I leaned against my desk. You mean he's mad that everyone knows the truth? Her silence was answer enough. I sighed. Mom, I don't know what you want me to say. He did this to himself. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's trying to get a loan. I blinked. A loan? From who? Mike, Lisa, even Grandma. I let out a slow, sharp breath. And what did they say? They turned him down, she admitted. No one wants to give him money after what they found out. I almost felt bad. Almost. Mom's voice wavered. The property tax deadline is next week. If we don't pay it, you'll lose the lake house, I finished flatly. I know. She sniffled. Ethan, please. It's not just a house. It's our memories. You grew up there. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Yeah, Mom, I did. And you let me pay for it while lying to my face about your finances. Her breath hitched. We didn't mean to hurt you, I scoffed. Then why didn't you stop? Why didn't you ever say thank you? She didn't have an answer. I let the silence stretch before finally saying, I'm done, Mom. You and Dad need to figure this out yourselves. And for the first time ever, I hung up on her. By Wednesday, things got even worse for Dad. Maddie sent me a screenshot of an email from Grandma. Greg, effective immediately, I'm adjusting my estate planning. If you can't treat both of your children fairly, then I can't trust you to handle family assets responsibly. I'll be meeting with my attorney to ensure that my inheritance is divided equally among all my grandchildren. I stared at the message. Dad had just lost his biggest financial backup. No wonder Mom had called me begging. By Friday, I heard the inevitable. Dad put the lake house up for sale. I didn't respond to any of it. I didn't check in. I didn't offer help. I just lived my life for the first time in years. And it was nice. I had more money in my savings than ever. My investments were growing. Hell, I was even considering buying my own vacation home, one that belonged to me, and only me. Then, late Saturday night, I got a text from Nathan. Nathan, Dad's blaming me. I frowned. Me? For what? Nathan, for the house. He says I should have used my trust fund to save it. I snorted. Oh, now he wants you to contribute? Nathan, he says it's my fault because you wouldn't have stopped helping if I hadn't gotten that trust fund. I let out a slow breath. Of course, Dad never took responsibility. He just found a new scapegoat. Me? That's not my problem. Nathan didn't reply for a while. Then, Nathan, I don't know what to do. For the first time in weeks, I hesitated. Nathan had been a spoiled, entitled brat his whole life. He never cared about how unfairly I was treated until now, but for the first time, he sounded genuinely lost. And if I was being honest, I didn't hate it. Me, figure it out like I did. And for the first time ever, I let Nathan clean up his own mess. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. I wasn't the family ATM anymore. I wasn't responsible for their mistakes. And as I stood on my balcony, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise, I realized I didn't regret a single thing. For the first time in years, my life was quiet. No more guilt-tripping phone calls. No more urgent family emergencies that somehow always required my bank account. No more texts from Nathan complaining about money while sitting on a trust fund. Just peace. And I liked it. The lake house was officially listed for sale. Dad had no choice. He couldn't afford the property taxes without me. Grandma had cut him off. The extended family was furious, and I had made it clear. I wasn't budging. He was backed into a corner, and for once, it wasn't my problem to fix. I knew he hated that. A week passed. Then, too, Nathan went radio silent after his last text. Mom sent a few half-hearted messages, but I didn't reply. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Maddie. "You're not going to believe this," she said, barely able to contain her laughter. "What now?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "Dad's mad at Nathan." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "Apparently, when they told him to use his trust fund to help save the lake house, he said no." I nearly spit out my drink. "You're joking." "Nope." Maddie was grinning through the phone. "He told them it was his future, and that they needed to figure things out on their own." I burst out laughing. The same excuse they had given me, the same reasoning I had been fighting against for years. And now, when Nathan was in a position to actually help, he pulled the exact same stunt. The irony was delicious. "God," I said, still chuckling. "I bet Dad lost his mind." "Oh, completely." Screamed at him for being selfish. Said he was abandoning the family. I smirked. "Sounds familiar." Maddie snorted. "Yeah, it does." By the end of the month, the lake house sold. The final price was way lower than Dad expected. Turns out, when you neglect maintenance for years and assume someone else will pay for repairs, the property value tanks. He was pissed. Nathan was even more pissed because Dad actually tried asking him for money again after the sale. I didn't even feel bad. For years, they both lived off of me without a second thought. Now they had to face what life was like without my support. It was their turn to struggle. A few weeks later, I got another text from Nathan. "Nathan, are you really never talking to them again?" I sighed. "Here we go." "Me? I never said that." "Nathan, then what? You're just gonna ignore them forever?" I leaned back in my chair, thinking, no, I wasn't cutting them off completely. I just wasn't letting them manipulate me anymore. Me, if they ever decide to treat me like an actual son instead of a bank, maybe we'll talk. Nathan didn't reply right away. Then, "Nathan, I think they know they messed up." I exhaled. Me, do they, though? Or do they just miss my money? Nathan sent a sad face emoji. I rolled my eyes. Mom finally called again a month later. I let it go to voicemail. "Mom, Ethan, honey, I just wanted to say, I understand now. I really do. I'm sorry for how we treated you. I know we don't deserve anything from you, but I just hope you'll talk to me again someday." I sat there, listening to her voice, trying to figure out if she actually meant it, or if she was just trying to fix things now that they had lost everything. I didn't know, but for the first time I had the power to decide, and I wasn't in any hurry to make that decision. Life moved on. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had spent years bending over backward for a family that never appreciated me. And now, I was finally living for myself, and it felt damn good. Story 2. I severed my ties with my family after years of being the letdown. My parents are urging me to return home, and my addicted sister is in need of me right now. My own parents humiliated me in front of everyone at my sister's graduation celebration 3 years ago, leaving me feeling completely ashamed. This celebration, surrounded by our close friends and family, was intended to be entirely about my elder sister, Amelia. After graduating from college, she had landed a fantastic job that she couldn't wait to begin. I anticipated hearing remarks that would just highlight her achievements when my parents got up to speak in her honor. She had put a lot of effort into getting to this point after all, and she was deserving of every accolade. One of the biggest gifts in their lives was my sister, whom they mentioned in their address that evening. By that time, I wasn't very shocked. I was old enough to understand that Amelia was more important to my parents than I was. My parents had always compared me to her, the more successful daughter, on a daily basis. However, after having Amelia, my parents started making jokes about how they should have stopped having children because, in their opinion, second-borns are typically worthless anyhow, and how they could have wasted more time and effort on Amelia rather than wasting it on me if she had been their only child. As I sat there, I was astounded to hear people speak such nasty things in such an open and thoughtless manner. I glanced around the room in the hopes that someone, anybody, would take note of how hurtful what they had said was, but all I saw were my family members' faces, smiling as though this hurtful analogy were just lighthearted banter. My parents had always made me feel inferior and worthless, but this was the first time they had done it so openly, so I had no choice but to accept the truth that, in their view, I was just not as good as their beloved daughter, Amelia. This was not an isolated incident or a case of poor decision-making. It was an affirmation of what I had always sensed, that they will always treasure my elder sister as their daughter. In contrast, I was viewed as a far-off afterthought. Growing up as the second-born, I was used to the implicit favoritism that pervaded our home. It was continuously infiltrating via their words, deeds, and routines. My parents would frequently fail to wish me a happy birthday, and on many occasions, they were conveniently away on business when my birthday arrived, leaving me essentially alone. But they wouldn't miss a second when it came to Amelia. Every year, without fail, both of my parents would be there to throw a lavish celebration and make sure she felt honored. Observing how they lavished her with love on her special day taught me early on to control my expectations and come to terms with the fact that my birthday just wasn't as important to them, because I was always a gregarious kid. My parents used to frequently tell me that I was problematic or bothersome just because of who I was. I was called tough because I didn't match the quiet, subdued stereotype, and reprimanded for something as trivial as being overly chatty or loudly expressing my interest. It appears that they like it better. Amelia, on the other hand, was constantly complimented on her quiet demeanor and reclusive behaviors. She was regarded by our family as the perfect daughter, mature and well-behaved. As a result, throughout the years, she was the one they showed and paraded about in front of everyone, while I was the one they often critiqued. For a while, I made an effort to project the image that my parents seemed to desire. I worked hard in the hopes that they would someday view me differently if I behaved differently, accomplished more, or went down the route they outlined. As I got older, though, I realized that I couldn't just make myself become Amelia. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't become her, since we were two distinct individuals. At some point, I simply gave up and tried to get used to their unwavering praise for her, the way they would boast about her achievements to anybody who would listen, while dismissing all I had ever done. But at least all those times, as painful as they were, had remained inside the family. I was surprised by how nonchalantly my parents seemed to embarrass me during their speech at Amelia's graduation, because I had never been embarrassed in front of others before. For the first time, they showed their lack of respect for me to the whole extended family. The fact that no one in my whole family voiced their opinion or informed my parents that this was improper astounded me even more. Nobody made those jokes at my expense, not even to the extent of showing me sympathy for my parents. With pride in their voices that I had never seen directed at me, my parents kept praising Amelia. They then proudly declared that they had purchased a brand new automobile for her as a graduation present, something she had always desired. Everyone in the room cheered, applauded, and laughed as Amelia gave my parents a heartfelt hug, filled with thanks and delight. They all appeared to be really content. I felt alienated from my own family at that point. The peculiar thing is that I've never been envious of Amelia. We had always gotten along well enough, and I firmly think she deserved all the excellent things that happened to her, but I was broken by that speech. The answer to the question of whether I approached my parents following that degrading speech is that I did. I had silently put up with their partiality, their indifference, and their cruel comments for years. I took it all in, telling myself that perhaps if I simply remained silent, if I just tried to be tough and not complain, then things could improve. However, I eventually lost it that night after the speech, and after being made the target of their joke in front of everyone, I had had enough of suppressing everything. I'm sick of acting as though their remarks no longer hurt me. I thus made the decision that I could no longer remain silent. In the hopes that my parents would see how much their behavior had impacted me, I plucked up the confidence to speak up. I wanted them to comprehend. In order to at least demonstrate that they were interested enough to listen to me, I wanted them to acknowledge the shame I was feeling at the time, as well as the hurt they had caused over the years. I reasoned that if I told them how I felt, they may change their minds, or at the very least feel bad about making me feel so unimportant. However, I encountered a chilly, contemptuous reaction when I eventually challenged them. They hardly listened to what I had to say. They accused me of overreacting rather than showing sympathy or offering an apology, as though the years of being disregarded and denigrated could be dismissed with such ease. They pretended that I had no right to be angry with them and that my sentiments were unimportant. My father even went so far as to say that he had nothing to be proud of in me and that I shouldn't blame them if they were unhappy with me. I still recall how casually he spoke it, like if my existence didn't concern him. However, my mother told me to stop overreacting and said that I was being too needy by being upset about something so little. It seemed like my parents were implying that I hadn't even merited the bare respect of being their kid because I hadn't done enough, that I wasn't worthy of their love or pride because I wasn't Amelia. The issue even reached my sister, who clearly insisted that I was being too hard on my parents and took their side. She assured me that their graduation speech was only a harmless joke and that I shouldn't be concerned about it. She even said something that deeply wounded me and will always stick in my memory. Amelia informed me that I may be able to make them proud if I had simply put in the same amount of study time and effort as she had. More than anything else, those words hurt. It was upsetting to be implied that I hadn't done enough to gain their regard. She made it seem so easy, as though my years of hard work had gone unnoticed by her, as though my hardships and my own efforts to find my position were nothing. I had assumed that, as my elder sister, she would somehow defend me, but she didn't. It seemed like a betrayal to hear that from her. In hindsight, that discussion altered everything. After that, I came to the realization that I was done with my family, done attempting to win their acceptance, done justifying myself, and done hoping for unattainable love or affirmation. I focused all of my attention on creating something for myself. After that day, I gave my all to my education, concentrating on the things that I could influence and that would help me have a brighter future. All of that effort paid off 2 years later. I achieved a personal achievement when I was admitted on a full scholarship to my ideal institution. It was an accomplishment that was all mine, the product of my diligence, commitment, and unwillingness to let the neglect of my family to define who I was. For the first time, I felt like I had accomplished something that was really mine, and I had earned that accomplishment. When I broke the news to my parents, they were in complete shock, as though they had never anticipated my decision to attend college at all, in addition to receiving a scholarship, as if she couldn't believe I could truly do something on my own. My sister looked at my admission letter twice. They had all obviously underestimated me, and I got a little gratification from seeing their shocked expressions. But then my mother made me feel bad by saying that it was a good thing. They had no college funds put aside for me anyhow, so this resolved all of their issues, and I now have a full scholarship. When she said that, I simply shook my head. My sister's schooling was easily funded by my parents, but they didn't think to save anything from me. When my move-out date came around, I recently packed up and moved out of my house to live in my college residence hall. I consciously decided to stop communicating with my parents and sister, Amelia, after that day. I felt no need to give them an explanation of why. After all, they had repeatedly demonstrated that they didn't care about my opinions, feelings, or efforts. Why should I waste my energy attempting to explain something to them that they had shown they couldn't even recognize? The years of neglect and pain they had caused me could not be undone by an apology. And I realized it was pointless to try to argue with them because they hadn't even provided one. My family kept in touch with me in the next weeks and months, sending me texts and emails. I was first tempted to open them in the remote hope that perhaps they had changed their minds and made an effort to put things right. However, every communication served as a sour reminder of their identity. Their emails were full of efforts to gaslight me into thinking I was the one being unreasonable, rather than accepting responsibility for the years of emotional suffering they had inflicted. They portrayed my choice to sever relations as immature and hasty, claiming I had overreacted. Their underlying tone consistently returned to the notion that I was the one severing the family, and that I was terrible for cutting them off. I have thus never bothered to respond to any of them. So far, my college experience has been fantastic. I've been able to devote all of my attention to my education, hobbies, and above all, forming connections with others who accept and cherish me for who I am. In order to save money for the future, I have started working part-time at a nearby diner. Meeting new individuals and learning about their lives at the diner is pleasant. I've thrown myself into my academics, my social life, and everything my new surroundings have to offer after severing my ties with my family, making meaningful experiences a part of my days. In all honesty, I haven't even thought about them or wondered how they're doing. I was shocked to learn that my parents had ceased writing to me a long time ago when I unexpectedly received an email from them yesterday. I had never even responded to any of their prior letters. My parents had some serious news to share with me, so they pushed me to get in touch with them right away via this email. My chest constricted in spite of everything, even the years of rejection and pain. I kept having the uneasy sensation that something horrible had occurred. All I could think of was the potential that someone in the family had been very ill or, worse, had died, and my heart began to race. I was determined to avoid them, but the worry got to me. I grabbed the phone, unblocked them, and gave them a call back right away. As I prepared myself for whatever news they were going to bring, my heart was pounding. I was informed by my parents that they wanted to tell me about my elder sister, Amelia, who was experiencing a serious personal issue. They have apparently learned that she has been struggling with drug addiction, which has had a terrible impact on her life. They claim that her addiction has gotten so bad that she has lost her job, spent all of her savings, and is now left with no options or resources. I was very taken aback by this news because I had no idea that my sister was experiencing anything similar. In my perspective, Amelia had always been the reliable, successful sister who had their life together. However, the same sister was now addicted to drugs. I found it difficult to accept that Amelia's addiction was so outrageous in my parents' view that it destroyed their perception of her. I could feel the shock, the despair, and above all, the enormous fear of what would happen to their reputation if anybody else ever found out. Along with sharing all of this, they said they hoped I might provide them with some answers. They said it was shocking that Amelia, of all people, had been involved in something as harmful as drug abuse, considering how grounded and responsible she had always appeared to them. Then, with a suspicious tone in his voice, my father questioned, "Back then, you didn't expose her to drugs, did you?" The implication caught me completely off guard. It was not only ridiculous, but also quite offensive that they could believe I was responsible for Amelia's difficulties, much less something as severe as exposing her to drugs. How could I offer drugs to my elder sister when I didn't even use them myself? And because of the way Amelia and the rest of my family had treated me, I hadn't spoken to them in years. I had been apart from their destructive lifestyles, concentrating on creating my own path. Now, however, they were ready to find someone else to blame, despite their idealized picture of Amelia losing it. And, as usual, it seems that I was the easiest person to blame. I asked them to speak with Amelia before making any assumptions, and told them how absurd it was for them to even suspect me. During our talk, I saw that my parents were more preoccupied with the embarrassment they thought Amelia's disclosure would cause the family. My mother appeared preoccupied with her discomfort about my sister's hidden habit, rather than expressing concern for her. "People would speak if they ever found out," she said, describing how surprising it was to see the side of her ideal daughter. Then, because she and my dad were overburdened and unprepared to deal with the situation with my sister, my mom started begging me to return home so I could assist them in caring for Amelia. What exactly do we do after all? She makes me feel so humiliated. Perhaps you might speak with her on our behalf. After years of not communicating with me, my mother asked me, as like it were a legitimate request. I was honest with them and informed them that I was unable to assist Amelia. She requires expert assistance. Family intervention at home is not enough to address my sister's addiction, which is a significant and complicated issue. I emphasized that the finest and most humane thing they could do would be to send her to a treatment facility where skilled specialists could help her recover if they genuinely cared about her health and wanted to help her overcome her addiction. However, my father pushed down the idea of sending her to rehab right away, almost trembling at the thought of her admittance to a treatment facility damaging their family's reputation. According to him, taking her there would only damage their reputation in the eyes of others. The idea of people becoming aware that their only successful daughter had a major issue like drug addiction was too much for him to handle. My father chastised me for bringing up this possibility, as though publicly admitting her addiction was somehow more embarrassing. He emphasized that I had to return home and that we all had to cooperate in order to care for Amelia, maintaining round-the-clock surveillance to prevent her from relapsing, as if this would resolve the problem on its own. He talked endlessly about how all they wanted was for my sister to get healthy and return to her normal life as quickly as possible. They believed that things would return to normal as long as no one else knew. They wanted me to participate in a charade, to pretend that nothing was wrong while concealing her difficulties from the public. I was filled with incredulity and rage as I listened. Why did my parents care so much about their image and what other people thought of them? My sister was obviously dealing with a severe issue, and my parents had the opportunity to prove that they could put their daughter's needs ahead of appearances and genuinely change her life, but they were unable to do so. Evidently, these individuals had not changed at all, and now they were attempting to reintegrate me, expecting me to maintain this family facade by assisting them in caring for my sister, to whom they constantly made comparisons. I told them I needed time to consider the situation. After all, I can't just up and go since I have to consider about my work and my studies. My parents argued that since they truly needed me, I could take at least 2 or 3 weeks off to assist them. I'm feeling torn about the whole affair right now. While a part of me wants to be selfish and let my parents raise their golden kid alone, another part of me wants to check in on Amelia and see if there is anything I can do to help. They still care more about maintaining their appearance than they do about getting to the core of the problem. So I don't know whether I can be much of a help either. If I decline to return home and care for my sister, who is addicted to drugs. One update. All right, whoa. I had no idea this story would become so popular. It has taken me some time to read through the hundreds of comments that I have received. I want to make some clarifications. I'm not hostile toward my sister. Actually, I sincerely want to assist her and I genuinely care about her. But because I haven't spoken to my family in 3 years, I've enjoyed a sense of security and serenity that I hadn't before experienced. I'm terrified that getting back in touch with my sister will allow my parents to re-enter my life as well. For anyone who are curious in how my sister got into a drug addiction and whether she has been battling it for years, possibly even before my parents just learned about it, to be honest, I'm not certain. Amelia was unquestionably the golden kid who was hailed and maintained as the ideal daughter, in my opinion. There is frequently a great deal of pressure to uphold this sort of pedestal, which leaves little opportunity for weakness or failure. If Amelia thought that her worth was related only to her successes and how others saw her, any setback, no matter how slight, may have been devastating. I suppose that over time, she may have turned to drugs as a coping strategy to get away from the pressure of those expectations or the worry of disappointing our parents. The notion that my sister could have been silently battling all these time without informing me makes me feel more worse. I wish she had felt comfortable talking to me, honestly, sooner. Before things reached this stage, I would have wanted to be there for her, to help her work through it. It simply makes me feel powerless, like if I could have helped her with this significant aspect of her life that I was unaware of. In addition, my parents had high expectations for me and my sister from an early age because they are high achievers themselves. I need some time to consider everything, and I'll keep you updated if anything else comes up. Update 2. I made the decision to contact Amelia, in spite of everything, after much internal discussion and support from some of the comments I read. Since she is my sister, I thought it was crucial to speak with her directly rather than relying on my parents' version of events to guide my actions. I sent her a text initially, just a basic message asking if she wanted to chat. After several hours, she finally responded and consented to a phone conversation. The voice on the other end of the telephone sounded like a ghost of the sister I knew. When we eventually talked, Amelia's tone seemed heavier, and she was more reserved. She gradually revealed what she had been going through. Amelia said that she had been battling addiction for a few years. She had always been the ideal, accomplished daughter, so it began soon after she graduated and started working at her law firm. She also found it difficult to uphold that position at work, constantly going above and above to win over her supervisor in the hopes of receiving further praise or a promotion. However, gradually she started to feel fatigued and burnout. Even still, Amelia believed that she had to live up to the standards that everyone had set for her. Therefore, she could never falter, slow down, or beg for assistance. A friend suggested recreational drug use to her as a way to relax when the stress got too much. Before she even noticed it, What started off as occasional use became into reliance. Amelia also disclosed that she felt stuck for a very long period. She couldn't disclose to her parents that she was struggling since she knew how they would respond. She felt alone because of their insistence on appearances and their refusal to accept anything that didn't fit their story. She maintained the facade, acting as though nothing was wrong, even when she started to lose control. She was unable to conceal the truth until she lost her work, started abusing drugs, and spent all of her funds. She asked me if I was judging her as harshly as she was condemning me, and expressed how ashamed she was to even tell me this. It was devastating to hear her story. I realized for the first time that her parents' elevated status wasn't a perk. It was a jail. While I've been struggling with the sorrow of being neglected, she had been dealing with the oppressive weight of being their golden child. Both of us, in our separate ways, had been affected by our parents' partiality and their fixation with control. I told her that I wish she had confided to me about her feelings, since there was no way that I would have ever judged her. My only regret is that I wasn't there for her during all of this. I understood her better than she could. After then, Amelia really apologized to me for everything that had transpired between us. She apologized for consistently siding with our parents. She acknowledged that she had been so preoccupied with her own problems at the time that she had not been able to relate to my suffering. She expressed her guilt for not defending me during the speech at the graduation celebration and expressed her sadness for her role in making me feel unimportant. I was momentarily at a loss for words. Part of me wanted to hang onto the fury I had held for so long, to remind her of how deeply her comments had hurt. The larger part of me, though, the one that had always cared for and admired my sister, simply felt sorry for all that we had to go through together. I told her that I didn't blame her and that I appreciated her apologies. She had, after all, suffered from our parents' poisonous conduct just as much as I had. In a different way, though. Amelia confided in me that she was afraid of what was ahead and unsure of her ability to bounce back. She believes she has failed everyone. Above everything else, though, she fears failing herself. She said that because our parents were so against the notion, she felt locked in her decision to go to treatment. She didn't want to let them down anymore since they had persuaded her that checking herself into a treatment facility would embarrass the family. I was as strong as I could be in telling her that she had to put herself and her healing first. I reiterated to our parents that she cannot conquer her addiction on her own, and that seeking professional assistance is not only essential, but also her greatest option for turning her life around. Despite her apparent hesitancy, I could see that my remarks struck a chord with her. I volunteered to assist her in researching treatment alternatives, and even offered to help her choose a facility outside of our area where she wouldn't have to worry about criticism or rumor from others, if she so desired. I informed her that she should take this action for herself and no one else, and that there was no shame in asking for assistance. Amelia sounded lighter at the end of our talk, as though some of the weight she had been carrying had been relieved by telling me the truth. She vowed to give our conversation careful thought and thanked me for getting in touch. I assured her that I would support her. The third update. Hi there, everyone. I feel so much better now that I've spoken with Amelia. I wish we had been able to get back in touch years ago. In any case, Amelia has consented to eventually check herself into a rehab facility located distant from our house. Not only are my parents upset with her for her choice, but they are also upset that I am now endorsing her. The fact that Amelia and I are now conversing behind their backs is unfathomable to them. My parents have threatened to hold me accountable for forcing Amelia to make this decision if she doesn't get over her drug addiction, even after attending the program. I've made the decision to assist Amelia remotely for the time being. As she heals, I'll keep checking up on her and providing emotional support. I will most certainly go see her again if our connection keeps getting better. After this, I'm going to resume having no communication with my parents. I refuse to be pulled back into their dominion. I hope this will be the wake-up call. I'm not holding my breath, but they must at last take responsibility for their acts. Story 3. It's my engagement celebration. I was taken aback when my parents announced that they were giving your sister the house from your childhood. You can't handle the family legacy. However, they claimed that your sister now owned the legacy estate after seeing the mansion I had constructed next door. With a voice that pierced through the champagne-filled excitement of my engagement party, my father made the announcement. You've never shown the proper respect for family traditions, Emma. Sarah deserves this. At the age of 32, I, Emma Collins, witnessed my parents sell the house where I grew up, the house I'd spent years secretly preparing to restore to my younger sister, who had never spent more than a summer there. The crystal flew in. Even though my hand shook a little, I remained calm, much to my father's obvious dismay. He had expected tears, protests, maybe even a scene. He received a little smile instead. "I understand." I spoke softly, looking him in the eye, and he decided to reveal it at my engagement party. Sarah, my 26-year-old sister, stood beside our parents, practically glowing with triumph. Their ideal daughter, she had always been. The person who attended law school in accordance with their meticulous plan joined our father's firm and never questioned their choices. However, in spite of their disapproval, I had decided to pursue a career in architecture and urban development and had started my own business from the ground up. With everyone there, we pondered. At least, she had the courtesy to appear a little uneasy when my mother drifted off. Jane, my fiancée, gave me a firm handshake but said nothing. He was aware of the impending event. "Everyone is present." I laughed a little and repeated, "Everyone's here to celebrate my engagement, and you decided it was the ideal moment to declare that you were giving away the house I grew up in? The home Mom promised would be mine when I reached 35. Before you left the family company, that is. Before you decided that your small building projects were more significant than legacy," my father retorted. "Little construction projects." He referred to it as my multi-million-dollar development firm. I had spent the previous decade creating it from nothing, while secretly accumulating every piece of property surrounding the original estate property. When prices were low, my parents had been too short-sighted to buy. Someone who is familiar with tradition is needed in the house. With a tone full of contempt, Sarah added her voice. "Someone who takes good care of it rather than transforming it into one of your contemporary monsters." As I sipped my champagne slowly, I considered the plans that were concealed in my office. "I've been working with the Historical Preservation Committee for the past 3 years, and the permits have already been issued," I responded. "You're correct. Lastly, someone who genuinely recognizes the legacy estate's worth is needed." My calm acceptance caused my mother's eyes to narrow. I used to debate, make my case, and attempt to explain things to them, but I had long since realized that it was useless to try to win their acceptance. Rather, I had invested all of my work into creating something that people couldn't ignore or reject. My father answered, "I'm glad you understand," but it seemed like he had been hoping for more opposition. "Next month, Sarah will take possession. By then, we anticipate that you will have taken out any last bits of personal belongings." I raised my glass and nodded before turning to speak to our visitors. "I appreciate everyone's attendance tonight. Thank you so much for joining James and myself in celebrating. And I have to make my own announcement immediately." My dad's expression hardened. His script did not call for this. "James and I have decided not to move into the city flat as scheduled." I kept paying close attention to my parents' facial expressions. "Rather, we'll be residing in the mansion I've been building for the past 3 years. It's directly next door to the legacy estate." The ensuing hush was deafening. As Sarah took in what I had said, her arrogant smirk wavered. When my father saw what I had done, what he had overlooked taking place right in front of him, his cheeks flushed. "That isn't feasible," he sputtered. "I own all of the land surrounding the estate, every acre I completed for him. You were too preoccupied with questioning my business sense to see that I had purchased everything. Permits have been granted, work is almost finished, and a historical preservation group is very excited about my plans to restore a whole heritage area rather than just one old home." My mom's social mask broke and she collapsed onto a neighboring chair. "You're not serious." "Oh," I said, bringing up the drawings on my phone, "but I am. Do you want to watch?" In fact, architectural features from the heritage estate were included in the construction of the new home. The Collins Heritage Project is the name we've given it. Several design magazines have previously covered it. As I showed them the pictures of the well-kept trees, the expansive drives, and the contemporary home that complemented rather than overpowered its old neighbor, the visitors crowded around. In order to build something that respected the past while welcoming the future, every little element had been carefully considered. Anger heated Sarah's cheeks as she pushed forward. "It's simply spite. You're attempting to obscure my gift." Keeping my voice low, I turned to face her. "This is business, passion, and vision, Sarah. There are 3 things about me that neither you nor her parents ever understood. You now possess the legacy estate. Well done. I sincerely hope so. It will be the focal point of the heritage walking tours beginning in the spring, so I hope you take good care of it. My father choked out while walking tours. Of course, I said. Plans for historical tourism, educational initiatives, and community gatherings are all part of the Collins Heritage Project. While not required, Legacy Estate's involvement would be fantastic. I've already established alliances with other local historic buildings. James put his arm around my waist with a look of pride on his face. Through all of this, he had been my pillar of support, comprehending why I had waited until the proper time to reveal my plans. I had always been undervalued by my parents, who only saw what they wanted to see, but now they were witnessing the reality. While they were preoccupied questioning me, I had established an empire. My mom said, "You've been preparing this for years." Her eyes began to light up with realization. I did confess it. I chose to create my own legacy ever since you first implied that I couldn't carry on our family's tradition. My declaration severely interrupted my parents' planned power play, and the engagement celebration ended soon after. Many people silently applauded me as the visitors departed. Some have even shown a desire to contribute to upcoming initiatives. Sarah and my dad left without saying anything more, but I knew that this was not the end of it. Later that evening, I stood on my office balcony and gazed out over the building site where my new home was being built. Just beyond its well-known silhouette, the Legacy Estate stood as a reminder of all I had battled for. "Are you all right?" James inquired. He brought me 2 glasses of wine, and I sipped one while he held me. "I'm more than all right." They saw me for the first time, actually noticed me, as someone who created something significant, rather than as their unsatisfactory daughter. "They ought to have realized that earlier," he remarked. "Perhaps," I said, "but I might not have pushed myself to make all of this if they had." Sometimes the best inspiration comes from being undervalued. My almost finished mansion's lights, which were the result of years of meticulous preparation and labor, glowed in the night. There would be difficulties tomorrow in handling my family's response, completing the building details, and getting ready for the Heritage Project debut. However, I relished the joy of at last sharing my vision tonight. Sarah may now own the Legacy Estate, but I had constructed more than one house. I had left a legacy of my own that would help the community as a whole, not just my family. My parents could give or take away any inheritance, but it was worth more than that. I stood in my office 3 weeks after the engagement party, going over the last few details of the building. My father was an unexpected guest, as my assistant announced. I could see him standing in the reception area through the glass walls, appearing uneasy and out of place with the contemporary furnishings. "Bring him in." I straightened my shoulders and stated that, although I had anticipated this visit, I was somewhat aback by how long it had taken him. He walked stiffly into my office and said, "Emma." His gaze swept over the honors hanging on the walls. In my almost finished house, there is a commanding view of both his priceless inheritance estate and the architectural models on elegant shelves. "Dad?" I pointed to a chair in response. "Why are you interested in my little building project?" He recoiled when his remarks were hurled back at him, but he took a seat. "Yesterday, I received a call from the Historical Preservation Committee. It has to do with planned excursions and educational activities." "Yes," I said, pulling up the presentations on my large screen. "Next month, we will begin the Heritage District program. Numerous local historic homes have already agreed. The inclusion of the Legacy Estate would be fantastic. It's not necessary, though, as I stated during the gathering." "You are attempting to coerce us," he said. I looked directly at him and shook my head. "I'm managing a business, Dad, one that coincidentally supports the preservation of regional heritage. Building a contemporary mansion next door is something you've always said you care about. By drafting an all-encompassing growth strategy that embraces the future while paying respect to the past." I showed him the detailed renderings and made the correction. "Observe how the new building blends in with the old architecture. In order to create a unified neighborhood identity, we have integrated features from each of the original estates in the area." My father leaned forward in spite of himself, his developers taking in the details. "I had meticulously prepared. These resources are genuine to the time period Yes, I looked for them for 2 years. Just the masonry. I no longer saw a change in his face. However, you weren't here to talk about the specifics of the building. With a hand stroking his silver hair, he reclined. Sarah is reconsidering her decision to buy the estate. Is she? Even though I felt a glimmer of happiness within, I spoke in a neutral tone. That's a shame. He acknowledged that the maintenance expenses exceeded her expectations. Additionally, the plans for the Heritage District will greatly raise the value of the properties. I'm done, but the obligations will follow. Not everyone is suited for historical property management. My dad's work became more demanding. You anticipated this. I was aware that Sarah had only ever used the estate for social media photos and had never demonstrated any interest in historical preservation. I answered calmly, as if I understood that once the Heritage District was authorized, property taxes would go up. The development plans, which have been available to the public for months, contain all of this information. We were cut off by a knock on my door. James came in with a tablet. I apologize for disturbing you, but the site tour is being conducted by the Historical Society. He hesitated. I can reschedule so I can see my father. I stood and replied, no need. Dad had just walked out. Slowly, my father stood with a puzzled look on his face. I stated that the historical organization is quite enthusiastic about the Heritage District's educational potential. We're talking about collaborations with nearby colleges and institutions. According to your mother, you have also been involved with her women's charity group. Silently, he said, indeed. For students who are interested in urban planning and historical preservation, we are starting a scholarship program. When we talked about it last week, Mom looked really intrigued. He was obviously unaware of this. Your mother and you met. After seeing the project highlighted in the local newspaper, she got in touch. I didn't mention that she'd also apologized in her own manner for the engagement party catastrophe. It was best not to say some things. James cleared his throat. Your consent is also required for the contractor's plans to restore the ballroom. My dad's eyes got big. I mentioned that it was the Cultural Center's ballroom. A state ballroom, the original heritage, is being used as the model. In fact, as a kid, I always adored that room. There was a flash of remorse on my father's face. I said, you used to hide in there during parties, sketching in your notebook, mostly designed concepts, thoughts on how to maintain its aesthetic appeal while modifying it for contemporary application. Unspoken words weighed heavily on the ensuing stillness. My father finally made his way to the door, but he stopped. Next month is your mother's charity gala. By then, will the new ballroom be completed? James and I looked at one another. Then I answered, perhaps the venue was intended to accommodate just that type of gathering. Before I could reply, he continued, I'll tell her to call you, and walked away. James waited until the elevator doors closed behind my father before speaking. I said, that was interesting indeed, as I saw my father standing outside the window, gazing up at the home that was forming adjacent to his cherished acreage. Have you received Sarah's financial records? James gave me the iPad, just as you anticipated. She is already considering taking out loans secured by the property. Not surprised, I nodded. Although Sarah had always relied on her parents to support her, the upkeep costs of the estate would soon become too much for her, particularly in light of the new Heritage District rules. Do we need to advance the timeline? James inquired. No, I said, putting the device down. Everything is going according to plan. Sarah will come to her own conclusions about the estate, and when she does, you'll be ready. We'll be ready. I took his hand and corrected him. Without your faith in my vision, none of this would have been possible. He gave my hand a squeeze. Speaking of which, wait till you see the latest renovations to the ballroom. In the archives, we discovered some original molding designs. As James showed me the restoration details, my father's visit came to mind. He came looking for fault, to show that he had made the correct choice in giving Sarah the estate. Rather, he discovered proof of everything he had resisted seeing over the years: my commitment, my skill, and my reverence for the heritage of our family. Whether the legacy estate took part, the heritage area would be successful. However, it was more rewarding than any retaliation to see my father understand that I had produced something greater than he had anticipated, something that would enrich rather than detract from his priceless legacy. Allow Sarah to contend with the demands of the estate. Let my parents consider their options. I had established my own legacy, one that would outlive their doubts and justify every ambition they discarded. In the lobby, members of the Historical Society were congregating. It was time to demonstrate to them the harmonious coexistence of the past and the future. Each strengthens the other. That was the essence of true legacy, after all, enhancing tradition rather than holding on to it in order to produce something even more significant. On the day Sarah formally moved into the legacy estate, the Collins Heritage Project was set to have its grand opening. I could already picture how out of place her ultramodern pieces would look against the meticulously preserved Victorian details as I watched from my office as movers carried her designer furniture up the historic home steps. James joined me at the window and said, "It's ironic that they gave her the estate because they believed you would modernize it too much. And she's doing just what they thought I would do now," I reply, checking my watch. "When will the Heritage Commission be there to conduct the inspection?" 2 hours. Can. Does she know? I grinned. She will shortly. Sarah texted me as if on cue, and my phone buzzed. Why is this member of the historical committee discussing rules and furnishings that are appropriate for the time period? I didn't answer. Rather, I collected my files and went downstairs to join the project team for our last walkthrough. The morning sun shone on the new mansion, its architectural elements perfectly complementing the legacy estate while establishing its own distinct character. Miss Collins, our head preservationist, called out, waving a folder. "The Historical Society Board is thrilled with the Educational Center plans. They're already booking school tours for next month." "Excellent," I replied. "And the community engagement programs local universities want to partner for architecture and preservation studies. Your restoration work is already being cited as a model for heritage district development." A commotion from next door interrupted us. Sarah stood on the estate's front steps. Her face flushed with anger as the Heritage Commission representative explained something to her. Even from this distance, I could read her body language, the defensive posture, the crossed arms, the impatient foot tapping. "Emma," she shouted, spotting me. "Did you do this? Did you set these people on me?" I excused myself from my team and walked to the property line. The Heritage Commission oversees all historical properties in the district. Sarah, as the estate's owner, "You'll need to comply with preservation guidelines. These guidelines are ridiculous," she exploded. "They're saying I can't update the kitchen with modern appliances or replace the old windows with energy-efficient ones. They won't even let me paint." "Actually," I corrected gently, "you can do all those things. You just need to follow historical preservation protocols. I have a list of approved contractors who specialize in period-appropriate modernization." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You had this planned? You knew I'd get stuck with all these restrictions." "I planned a heritage district that would protect and celebrate our local history," I said firmly. "The legacy estate's involvement is voluntary, of course, though opting out might affect property values." The Heritage Commissioner nodded. Significantly, properties within designated historical districts often receive a 20 to 30% rise in value, providing they follow preservation criteria. Sarah's face paled. "But the upkeep charges are tax-deductible under the Heritage Preservation Act." I finished. "I have all the documentation in my office if you'd want to review it." Before she could react, a familiar automobile came into the estate's driveway. Our parents emerged, looking anxious. "What's going on?" our father demanded. Sarah called, stating something about not being permitted to remodel, just studying heritage district guidelines. Calmly, I explained. Conventional practice for historic properties. The commissioner sees the chance to dive into a full discussion of preservation rules, historic tax benefits, and maintenance criteria. As the financial ramifications became evident, I saw my father's face change from irritation to worry. Additionally, as we are located within the history district, all of these rules are applicable, he inquired. With great enthusiasm, the commissioner affirmed that the legacy estate is a cornerstone property. Because of its historical value, it must meet the strictest preservation guidelines. However, the restoration project your daughter is working on next door is a great example of contemporary integration. With a look of understanding in his eyes, my father turned to face me. "All of these specifications have already been met in the new residence." "Of course," I said. "We spent 3 years integrating contemporary amenities while making sure every detail complied with or surpassed preservation regulations. In the long term, it's actually more economical. Sarah made a wise and economical choice. Do you realize how much these preservation contractors charge? I do, I answered. I am also familiar with the tax breaks and grant programs that help defray those expenses. The management plan for the Heritage District includes all of this. After silently watching, our mother eventually said anything. The plan you tried to tell us about 2 years ago, the one we dismissed as unrealistic. The ensuing quiet was thick with familiarity. They were at last appreciating the breadth of my creation. The neighborhood's future would be shaped by a comprehensive heritage preservation system, not just one restored mansion. Perhaps, our father said slowly, we should discuss this further as a family. I looked at my watch. In an hour, the project will open, and then I have meetings with the Preservation Board and a historical society. But tomorrow I'm free. Our mother mimicked the opening. Indeed, naturally, the one that was highlighted in the Architectural Digest this month. Asterisk. James confirmed that he would be joining us. National attention has been drawn to the Heritage District concept. M is being recognized by the State Preservation Society next month. Sarah sagged against the elaborate railing of the mansion. This is impossible, she said. I am unable to handle the requirements and uphold all of these criteria. Nobody expects you to master preservation in a day. I spoke in a softer voice. These items are handled by specialists. The same people you collaborate with. Our dad inquired. I gave a nod. In their field, they are the best. Even so, they're waiting. With all of the History District homes in need of maintenance, the list is becoming fairly lengthy. The commissioner excused himself, leaving us in another loaded silence. The difference between the properties was startling. The legacy estate loomed behind Sarah like a lovely but taxing responsibility, while my meticulously restored mansion was bustling with intentional activity. According to our mother, she wasn't ready to manage the charity event. Suddenly, it's in 3 weeks. It will take a lot of effort to get the estate's ballroom up to code for public gatherings. The ballroom of the Cultural Center will be prepared. I provided cutting-edge facilities that complied with all current laws and preservation guidelines. Sarah pushed the railing aside. Take it, she urged in a strained voice. The property. It's obvious you know how to handle it. I'll look for another place to call home. Our father began Sarah, but she interrupted him. Now, Dad, we all realize this was a mistake and was the one who genuinely cared about maintaining the estate's heritage. All I wanted was, in an attempt to prove something, she trailed off. I made a gentle suggestion. Believe me, I can relate to the emotion. As our parents looked at each other, decades of presumptions and errors hung between us. The sound of approaching autos caught our attention. The first reporter to show up for the project launch. Let's have a conversation, our dad said. Really? Talk about everything. I gave a nod. Tomorrow morning, my office, bring your attorneys, will meet to discuss transferring the estate correctly this time. I watched the media set up their cameras, using my mansion's grounds as the backdrop, while they departed to attend to Sarah's upcoming move. Family conflict wasn't the main focus of the Heritage District narrative. It was about maintaining heritage while developing for the future. Are you ready? James squeezed my hand and asked. I took one final look at the inheritance estate. Its ballroom reminds me of all the dreams I've drawn there. More than prepared. It's time to show everyone what legacy actually means. 1 month after Sarah abandoned the legacy estate, I stood in its rebuilt ballroom watching my mother's charity banquet spread the space globe with meticulously maintained Victorian chandeliers, their light bouncing off the beautifully restored wooden floors. My recently finished home was visible through the large windows. The two properties now functioned together as the focal points of the flourishing history area. As she joined me by the window, my mother remarked, "It's just like I imagined, but I think you had the idea long before any of us did." As a child, I used to sit in here and draw pictures of how the estate could be preserved while evolving into something more. I said, I simply never imagined that it would take losing it to accomplish that. She lightly stroked my arm. Emma, we were mistaken. I couldn't see, because your father and I were too preoccupied with upholding tradition. Our goal is not to destroy it, but to improve it. As he led a group of interested board members on a tour throughout the room, my father proudly explained the historical value of numerous architectural aspects that I had meticulously researched and repaired. Next week marks the opening of the Heritage Education Center. We have a full schedule of academic events and school excursions for the upcoming 6 months, I continued. Sarah, too. She's doing well in her new condo downtown. Actually, it appears relieved to be off the hook. Last week, we had coffee, discussed her, maybe joining the Heritage District's community outreach program. My mom's eyebrows went up. Really? She's very good at social media. I gave a shrug. The Historical Society might need help publicizing its activities to younger people. James appeared with champagne, handing us each a glass. The Preservation Board chairman wants to examine spreading the History District idea to additional communities. Of course he does, my father stated, joining our group. Since the project's inception, the area's property prices have risen by 30%. Every developer in the city is trying to replicate your model. Emma, he offered assistance, but it has nothing to do with the money I initiated. Now I am aware of that. It's about creating something meaningful, something that honors the past while building toward the future. He smiled slightly. Something I should have comprehended when you first attempted to explain it to me years ago. A quartet of strings started playing from the musician's alcove that had been restored. During the remodeling, I also found another architectural feature. Couples came onto the dance floor, their modern knight's clothes making an interesting contrast against the Victorian atmosphere. I've been talking to your mother about what to do with the Collins family properties, my father said cautiously. Not just the estate, but all of them. I waited, feeling there was more. We want you to supervise everything, he added. Future projects, the heritage area, the estate, all of it. Not because you're our daughter, but because you've demonstrated you understand how to protect and develop our heritage better than anybody, even you. I couldn't help asking. He genuinely laughed. In particular, myself. Years ago, I would have updated this location, destroyed half its historical value without realizing it. James gave me a firm squeeze on the hand while I thought about their offer. I have health issues. Finally, I said. You do, of course. Mom grinned. You have a plan all the time. Preservation covenants will keep the estate and my mansion permanently within the Heritage District. The educational activities go on, and we lay the groundwork for other historic sites to carry out comparable preservation projects. The paperwork has already been drafted. My dad took an envelope out of his jacket and confessed, "Your attorney was helpful." I blinked, startled. "Did you visit Mr. Harrison?" With a dry tone, my mother stated, "We've learned to consult experts, particularly those who have outsmarted us." Looking around the ballroom, I saw my childhood dreams made reality. The estate functioned as more than simply a prestige symbol or a conserved artifact. As it developed into its next chapter, it served as a living example of history, passing on lessons to new generations. James nodded toward the doors and added, "There's one more thing." They opened to see Sarah, looking apprehensive but determined. She had a well-known notebook and a leather binding. My old childhood notebook full of sketches and ideas for the estate. Discovered this one moving out, she said, holding it out to me. Thought you may want it back, though. Those dreams have already come true because of you, reminiscent of hours spent hiding in corners and drawing fantasies that everyone had rejected. I snatched the notepad. Maybe not all of them yet, I said. There is still space for expansion in the Heritage District. Could need someone that knows social media marketing. A smile pulled at her lips. My proposal was accepted this morning by the Historical Society Board. Apparently, my sister's opinion carries a lot of weight around here. Imagine that, our father murmured. The classic waltz that used to play at every family gathering in this ballroom has been replaced with a new song. James extended his hand. Can I have this dance? I glimpsed flashes of my family looking on proudly as we crossed the floor. I changed the estate into something better than they had envisioned, not because I had regained control of it. No longer was the legacy estate only a reminder of the past. It was a bridge to the future, proof that preservation and progress could coexist together. Happy? James inquired quietly. I looked around at the restored ballroom through the windows, at my mansion next door, and beyond, to the thriving Heritage District that had grown from my childhood dreams. More than happy, I replied. I'm home. The Heritage Estate pulsated with fresh life that was not only maintained, but also reborn as the music grew and the chandelier glistened. Sometimes I realize losing something is the only way to convert it into everything it was meant to be.